Hi everyone, Brennan Caberhill here from the Science Teachers Association of Ontario and our 2014 conference. We're about to start our second Google Hangout on air. Here we are in the conference room C with David Miller. He's going to be delivering a presentation about his work with the World Wildlife Fund. So we'll just get started in a couple minutes here, and I hope you enjoy.
Why are you putting them on the internet?
No, but you should look at the
Well,
and two things.
yeah, you hope so, but
Every speaker, if I speak, everybody needs to. But if I'm invited, it's the old.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just standing on the platform and pretend I'm tall. Anyway, our speaker today is David Miller, who is currently the president of the and CEO of the World Wildlife Fund here in Canada. The organization, of course, is one of Canada's foremost conservation organizations, creates solutions to the most serious conservation challenges facing our planet, helping people and helping nature to thrive. Now, most of you, I'm sure, know that our former mayor here in the city, and maybe some of you came to see what it looks like and so forth. Anyway, we're delighted to have him here with us now, and he certainly has done an awful lot of important work, both as a civic leader and now in the field of the environment. He's a Harvard-trained economist and professionally a lawyer, and he and his wife, Jill Arthur, are the parents of 2 children. So I guess you know about education at a certain point. So I'll turn things over to you.
Thanks very much, Dawn, and thank you to the Science Teachers Association of Ontario for the invitation today, and thank all of you for coming in to hear my thoughts over lunch. It's appreciated. I'm going to try and speak for about 35 or 40 minutes, and then maybe take some questions, have a conversation, whatever works for the room. I do have to say a couple of things. Don, thank you very much for the gracious introduction. If I had to introduce myself, I'd say I'm David Miller, president of the World Wildlife Fund Canada and recovering politician. And I'm almost fully recovered, I might add. Secondly, I do have to say my daughter's in second year university and my son's in grade 12. And my daughter is studying engineering at McMaster, which is a great university. Oh my God, is it hard? It amazes me. They have 36 hours of classes a week. And I always got taught that you're supposed to study for 2 hours before 1 hour of class. So if that's correct, that's something like 108 hours of academics. I don't know how they do it. You'd all understand how they do it because you're science teachers. But it's been interesting being the parent of a grade 12 because Simon's very worried about whether he's taking enough science to have proper options in university. I don't want to disappoint you, but not all of his classes were science. But he is taking some science. When I was in grade 13, we had to take 6 courses. I took 7, 3 maths, chemistry, history, and then double English. I suggested that to Simon, and he said, I think 1 math's enough, Dad. So they're different nowadays. And I guess my other comment is I saw the previous speaker for a few minutes, and I thought his point about the importance of continuing to be a learner in a time of great change is a very interesting one. I thought that was very powerful, and of course, as science teachers, you're both learners and help facilitate us to be learners. I'm having to learn myself. When I was an elected official, I used to give a speech by preparing heavily and then standing up and speaking. Now I have my BlackBerry to time myself, my iPad, which has my remarks on it, which I will completely ignore, but they're here just in case. A Sierra wireless, whatever the hell that is, but I need that to allow me to connect to the internet and my laptop. And that's just to give half-hour remarks to you. Imagine if they were an hour long, I'd have 8 devices. So I'm having to learn as well, just to give a speech. What I want to talk about is the WWF's work on science, the importance of science to us, and the importance of communicating science. And it's in a context, and the context is the serious challenges to nature in the world today. And they're extremely serious. We released our Living Planet report. And just in case you don't know about WWF, we're an organization that's in over 100 countries. Can people hear me?
Yeah.
Do you need it for your mic? No, I'm fine. I'm great. Thank you very much. This is what I really want, the clicker. I flew to Switzerland once to give a speech and the clicker stopped working. And when you have slides, you tend to use them to make you remember your speech. So it was a very embarrassing moment. The WWF, it works in over 100 countries. Our international organization is headquartered in Switzerland. And our organization sometimes works together, sometimes works independently. In Canada, we tend to work a little bit independently because there are so many issues in Canada that require the attention, the support of science, and the attention of those who care about nature. But one of the things we've done together as an organization is something called the Living Planet report. It comes out every couple of years. It came out about a month ago. And you may have seen it in the media because it contains some quite devastating stories, one of which is that 52% of all wildlife in the world has disappeared since 1970. Completely disappeared from the planet. Not 52% of species, 52% of all wildlife. So there's half as much wildlife today as there was when I was in grade 7. It's an astonishing figure. And it's because of 2 causes, predominantly, because of climate change and because of human economic activity, unsustainable economic activity that isn't working in harmony with nature. So at WWF, we see it as our mission to help do what we can to reverse those trends. So to create economic practical models that allow people to work in harmony with nature and therefore nature to thrive. An example might be the cod fishery. For 350 years, there was an unbelievable abundance of cod. So much, although it's not true, but it's believed that the first fishermen who came to Canada said that they could walk on the water. That's how much cod there was. And in 22 years ago, they had to shut it down completely because the cod had virtually disappeared. And that just didn't harm nature and have a huge impact on the oceans. That actually tremendously harmed human beings. Over 50,000 people were put out of work within 6 months of the cod fishery being closed in Newfoundland. Devastating to communities, particularly smaller communities in Newfoundland, many of which simply disappeared. Been there for hundreds of years, just disappeared. And we've been working with a small cod fishery off the west coast of Newfoundland. The big one's the northern cod fishery. We're working with a smaller one to help bring it back using principles of sustainability, and we are this close to having that cod fishery certified under the MSC certification as being sustainably fished. This close. So from nature disappearing to 20 years later having a rebound, because we started with the idea that we have to protect nature first and work with principles of sustainability, is a remarkable turnaround. That's the kind of work the World Wildlife Fund tries to do. And our work is always based on science. And one of the challenges we have in this 52% is not just climate change and human behavior. One of the challenges we have is to do with science. We're science-based. Sometimes we do science, but we're a small organization. We've got about 125 employees. We can't do all the science that's needed in Canada. And unfortunately, we're seeing a trend, not just in Canada, but of people not respecting or listening to science. So in the United States of America, the world's wealthiest country, we regularly see opinion polls that show that somewhere between 30 and 40% of Americans don't believe that climate change is happening. And the statistics for the Earth being flat are slightly smaller. No, they're much smaller. But it's an astonishing thing, given the seriousness of climate change and what's happening, whether it's in the oceans or on land, that people don't believe that it's happening. We see similar problems in Canada. We see governments that do not accept science, that don't act, don't even consider science in their decisions. And we also see the federal government has forced its scientists not to publish their work in peer-reviewed journals. And in fact, work that's paid for collectively through public funds isn't accessible publicly. And we see that scientists at the federal level aren't really allowed to speak to the public either. So there's two allied problems. One is about science and our collective ability to understand it and respond to it. And the second one is about communication. And I think your role as science teachers is a real understanding of the importance of science, what it is, what doubt means. That it's actually, you can have some uncertainty. And secondly, you help people understand how to communicate science. And I think that's more and more important. And I'll give you an example in a few minutes of some work we're doing, both that's science-based to address these serious problems that are facing nature, because that's what we're about, is nature. And secondly, about the communications challenges. And I'll show you some innovative things we've tried to do to have some fun with communicating these problems and the solutions and the challenges. Also some of the challenges when you work with scientists, because a lot of our staff are people who were trained in science. And they think a bit like scientists and perhaps not like former elected officials or reporters. And you need to in order to communicate very well. I must say, for somebody, I studied economics, as was mentioned, and then got a law degree and practiced law for 9 years. As somebody who was not trained really in science except for the high school basics, I've got tremendous respect for the work you do as teachers and the work that scientists do in general. It's unbelievably important. And I'm learning more and more at WWF how important it is when we base our actions on science. We know we're really strong. We know that if people attack us, environmental organizations were attacked a couple of years ago, as you may recall, for being terrorists. I think that was an appalling thing to say because what terrorists do in the world is terrible. To impute those kinds of motives on environmentalists was appalling. An elected official in the government said this. When those kinds of things are said, if we're based strongly on science and are standing with science and are saying that these are problems that we've used the best possible science to analyze and here's some solutions, we're on incredibly strong territory. And nobody can diminish our credibility. And it's one of the reasons that WWF values science so much. And unfortunately, the role of organizations like the World Wildlife Fund Canada has become more and more important as the federal government in particular cuts the funding for science, and as it restricts its scientists' ability to communicate. The only people left to do that work and to communicate it are nonprofit organizations. So it's become critical today in Canada for organizations like ours to do this work and to talk about it in a way that's informative, entertaining, and inspiring and motivating for people. So what do I mean? Well, I'll talk about one part of our work, which is called freshwater health assessments. So there's fresh water is something that Canada has in abundance, something, frankly, we take a little bit for granted sometimes. My mom grew up in England during the Depression, and I came to Canada in 1967 from a small farming village in England. And you'd think England has an abundance of water because of all the rain, but people are actually very careful there, partly because of the price. So when we wash dishes in England, we filled a container within the sink, and you did it in quite a precise order. You did the glassware first, and the less dirty things, and all the way onto the pots with one thing of water. My kids never, well, first of all, they don't wash the dishes, but once they learn in their life to wash the dishes, they won't behave that way. You know, they'll wash a glass with the sink running. And I think that's true in many Canadian families. We just don't pay enough attention to our water because of its abundance, yet it's an incredible value of Canadians. It's part of who we think we are as Canadians, Great Lakes. I think people know that in general terms, I know you all know that we're home to 20% of the world's fresh water. Yet at the same time, there is no national system for evaluating the health of our watersheds. We don't actually know, based on a government system, what is the health of our great river systems and watersheds in Canada on the same statistical basis. There are statistics available, but until the work was done that I'm about to speak about, nobody had a system where you compare the St. John River in New Brunswick with the Mackenzie on exactly the same basis. So some of the scientists at World Wildlife Fund Canada felt that in order to act to ensure that we're acting where there are problems with the water systems, and this, by the way, this is one of the problems internationally, and the reason wildlife has declined by 52% is because of problems with fresh water, particularly from agricultural activity, and from activity things like the mining of bitumen in Alberta, which has huge impacts on the Athabasca River. So we created a system called the Freshwater Health Assessments that use publicly available data to create a consistent way to measure the health of rivers across Canada. To illustrate my point about science communication, one thing I would encourage you as science educators to do is to equip your young scientists with ways to talk simply and easily about science that people understand. So my team came to me, I've been with WWF a year ago. They started this work before I was there, and I was to give a speech on freshwater health assessments to a conference on water. And they said, okay, I said, okay, what are we measuring? And they said, we're measuring the quantity of water, the quality of water, the health of the fish, and the benthic invertebrates. And perhaps you all understand what benthic invertebrates are, but I can assure you that the average reporter and I don't. Had absolutely no idea what my team was talking about, and because they're scientists, it's extremely obvious to them. You know, benthic invertebrates are bugs, apparently. And if we wanted to communicate this really well and simply, we would say something like quantity, quality, fish, and bugs. Something that just grabs people's mind and go, oh yeah, okay, of course, that's what I get. And if you said it the other way, the first thing you're going to get from a non-scientist is, what do you mean? And that's not the question you want. The reaction you want is, oh, okay, I get it. How healthy are the rivers? Turns out across Canada, some rivers are in good shape, some aren't. The Humber River in Toronto is one of the urban rivers we measured, and it's not bad for an urban river. Together with this freshwater health assessments. We've assessed about 25% of the watersheds in Canada, the Great River sheds, and we'll have them all done in the next couple of years. We also have a fund that gives out grants to community organizations. And the intent is to give out grants to community organizations that are working on the problems in the rivers that have problems. So is there a problem with the survival of salmon in the Humber River? Well, let's work with the Conservation Authority and some community organizations on the health of the fish in the Humber River, for example. Is there a problem in the Athabasca River with low flows because the amount of water that's used to process the bitumen deposits in Alberta? And by the way, you can look at those oil companies there as water companies, not oil companies. That's how much water they use. Is there a problem with quantity there? Well, then let's work with some local Aboriginal organizations, and let's work with the provincial government and the water consumers to try to find a way around that problem. And we've created a fund called the Loblaw Water Fund, which hands out these grants. And the idea is to use the science, which tells us which rivers are healthy, on a comparative scale nationally to help motivate change. And our grants, if a community organization has a small grant from somebody like us, they're often able to use that to get much more money because somebody knows that they've gone through a process that's validated it. And it also allows them to talk to government in quite a different way. So if I've got the technology right, one of the things we've done here is create a video. I was very excited. It didn't work last time, so maybe it'll work. Here we go. To create a video about this.
Freshwater health in Canada. With the freshwater health assessment in hand, you can pull the rest of your knowledge and expertise and get things flowing in the right direction. Healthy rivers and lakes are vital to keeping all of us healthy too. The freshwater health assessment gives you the information you need, so you have time to collaborate, advocate, and enjoy the water. From morning to night, in every season.
Probably not a perfect video, although I like the woman swimming and just jumping up from the water, just like the fish did through the ice. But it'll give you an idea of a simple way that we use to try to communicate the work we're doing, because one of the things we have to do is also motivate people to support us, partly financially, but also in their actions. So you want to inspire people and bring them along to address these challenges. Otherwise, the challenges remain unaddressed, whether it's through government action, because governments listen when there's lots of people involved who want to make change, or whether it's through private action, which is mostly what we try to inspire. So that's one of the areas. Sorry?
Maybe just click on the white space under the map. Use the computer.
Okay.
And that might re-engage the PowerPoint.
Here?
Yep. There you go.
As part of this, we haven't got there yet, but as part of our approach to freshwater, we're working with a whole bunch of sponsors and the Vancouver Aquarium and others, and something called the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup, which at first instance is about litter. It's actually about the health of water, because as you probably know, plastics, particularly in oceans, are creating really significant challenges for natural life and for fish life. So we do this cleanup all the way across the country. Hundreds of thousands of Canadians get involved. And it's a great way for us to connect people to natural systems through action, and also gives us an opportunity to educate them a little bit about the problems we're trying to correct. So it's not just about picking up some garbage butts at Ashbridges Bay, as I'm doing in this photograph. By the way, when you're with WWF, everybody knows this because of the panda, so the panda has to appear. We were in Churchill the last few days doing some work on polar bears there. As you probably know, the polar bears are extremely threatened by climate change because the sea ice is melting. They feed on seals in the spring, and the season now is 6 weeks shorter. So they have 6 weeks less of eating seals and eating blubber, and it means by November, the bears are often almost starving, and it's a particular problem for females and their cubs. So in the area on the eastern Hudson's Bay, we're seeing quite serious declines in the polar bears because of climate change. So we're up there looking at the polar bears, and of course we had the panda with us, which was a little bizarre, but everybody wanted their photo with the panda. They always do. Whoops, didn't mean to go there yet. So in the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup, our goal over the next few years is to link this volunteer activity with the freshwater health assessments and with the Loblaw Water Fund. So we've got science, really important science, telling us which riversheds are healthy and which not, and which most need our attention, and broadly speaking, what the problems are, whether it's quality, quantity fish, or bugs. And then we have actions to help people change that. And we're hoping to use this mobilization of hundreds of thousands of people to work in places that actually need volunteers to make change. And we've seen this locally. I don't know, how many people here know Hyde Park very well? You know? Oh, okay. Are you Toronto? Yeah, okay. Well, if Grenadier Pond, 20 years ago, was surrounded by concrete. There were no fish in the pond. The pond was virtually dead because it was an open storm sewer, and the water ultimately came from the stockyards and from the railway yards. So it was poisoned by oil and poisoned by animal remains. And under Barbara Hall's leadership, actually, in partnership with the Conservation Authority and others, Grenadier Pond was rejuvenated by planting new plants, getting rid of some of the concrete, in other places just planting the plants that grew over the concrete, all of which was designed to create fish habitat. And then pike and bass were reintroduced to the park. They did some work to keep the worst pollutants out. And the pond now is far healthier than it was, and the fish are actually living. And you can do that kind of thing with significant volunteer contributions in the planting of the plants, for example. And that's the kind of work we're hoping to inspire by analyzing what rivers need it, and then by mobilizing Canadians who are already mobilized to do something to make the fresh water better, in this case clean up. We're hoping to raise that up a little bit, to be far more hands-on and direct in what's done. Second piece of work we're doing, I alluded to a little bit earlier, which is about the cod fishery. So what we did when we got involved in this is we sat down and said to ourselves, this is a really big problem. You know, we're a little organization. We've got international heft and connections. It's an important thing we bring to the table, unlike most other conservation organizations in Canada. But how do we, as a relatively small organization with international heft and connections, how do we address this challenge in a way that's really going to make meaningful change? And the solution we came up with was to say, let's work with the biggest participants in the fishing industry and drive the change not just through nature and science, take the science to them and drive the change through people's purchasing habits. So one of the reasons we've been able to persuade the fisheries off Newfoundland is called 3PS. That's the name of the area. One of the reasons we've been able to persuade them to participate in the fisheries improvement projects that are leading to certification as sustainable is because WWF in England is working with Marks and Spencer. Okay, everybody knows Hyde Park. Does everybody know Marks and Spencer? Yes. Okay, for many years, all of my underwear came from Marks and Spencer, but that's way too much information. You know, if you grew up in England, that's just, at least as a working class boy, that's just where you shopped. Marks and Spencer is one of the biggest retailers in the world. They sell a lot of cod, and they will not buy it unless it's sustainable. Most Newfoundland cod actually goes to Europe, doesn't come to Canada. So part of our project, we worked with the Fishermen's Union, the fish processors, and with Marks and Spencer's to help create markets for properly sourced cod that was sustainable. And that's one of the ways we've been able to persuade people involved in the fishing industry that they should follow principles of sustainability because it's in their economic interest and it's helping to sustain people working. So again, that link between the economy and nature. The second thing we did was work with Loblaws. They're a big partner of ours. And Loblaws, through Galen Weston, and I've got to applaud him for his environmental leadership because he didn't have to do this. He understood the science and was briefed on it all, and he directed Loblaws to have completely sustainable, to only sell completely sustainable seafood by the end of last year. Now, they actually didn't reach their target. They're only at 88%. But they're well on their way, and they're at 88% either sustainable or in the process of certification. And this doesn't just mean beautiful pieces of salmon caught wild in BC that are certified MSC, or salmon from properly done pens on land that are certified ASC. It also means things like pet food, because there's a huge amount of fish products way beyond what we eat that are sold in supermarkets. And Loblaws got to 88%. And it's a really significant achievement because they're the biggest retailer of seafood in Canada. And that's why we wanted to work with them, because if we wanted to change the way the industry works, you need to work with the biggest retailer. And we also worked with the biggest fish processors and everybody else. And this was all based on the idea that there is a certification for sustainability. Marine Stewardship Council, MSC. WWF, before I arrived, helped create that. And that was a science-based certification that's very, very technical about what the health of fish population is, and how you should fish and what techniques you should use in all of that. We helped create it. We let it go. We don't need to run it. We just use it, and we encourage all our partners to use it. And I'm actually quite encouraged about all of this, but there's been one problem, and it's surprising given Loblaw's reach as Canada's largest food retailer and fish retailer. You know, everybody gets those little brochures at their door, at least we do, those of us who still have door-to-door mail delivery at least. That have all the discounts from Loblaws that communicate every week with their customers. One of the things they've discovered is they're not selling as much sustainable seafood as they expected. So we've been running a project to try to tell people about the issues in a really simple way, to communicate these scientific ideas in a really simple way. And again, we've got a video, and you'll have to give me a moment to find it. Yeah, okay. So we did it on this?
Yeah, we didn't hear the previous video.
Okay, how do I do that?
Your health is gone.
Maybe hold your mic to the speaker. There's also lots of empty seats up here.
Okay, let me get the mic, okay? Okay, is this working? So, by the way, don't call me sir. And I should have prefaced this by saying that both my mother and father were teachers. My mom ended up being a teacher librarian, and my father was a math and English teacher, but most known for being the hockey coach at an American school. So I don't know if that gives me any street credibility with the science teachers, but okay, so I'll try this, and hopefully I'll get you the sound. Can you hear that a bit?
You recycle because it's next to the trash. You buy organic. Sometimes you conserve water when you can. And every now and then you even save energy. Just want to know. You may do all these things because they're easy and practically unavoidable. You still do it. And now you're going to help reverse the decline of fish stocks by choosing the fish with the MSC logo. Because it's really easy.
Could you hear that at all, or did you? No.
No.
Okay, I'm going to rebroadcast it. Which does probably raise another issue. If you're going to communicate science, do it in a way that technologically works. Hey you. Environmentalist over there. You recycle? Because it's next to the trash. You buy organic. Sometimes. You conserve water. When you can. And even now and then, you even save energy. Just not tonight. You may do all these things because they're easy.
And now you're going to help reverse the decline of fish stocks by choosing the fish with the MSC logo.
And now you're going to help reverse the decline of fish stocks by choosing the fish with the MSC logo because it's really, really easy. It's a bit funnier if you don't have to have it interpreted, but well, thank you. So, we're trying to, and I'm not sure this is perfect, but it didn't have to be, because what we're trying to do is communicate in a different way that's interesting and fun and still communicates the basic science facts and helps mobilize people for change. So the way this came about is similar to freshwater health assessments. There's serious science involved in assessing how the health of fish stocks and how you can fish sustainably. I think this is another one. It's just music. It's really good music. Cat meows. That one's designed for people to watch at bars in between the football games and have the sound off. So the idea is we're starting with the science, and then we're moving to communicate it in ways that help mobilize people to take action, because that's what we're about. Final example I want to talk about, and I've gone a bit longer than I meant to, but climate change is having another impact in Canada that's extremely serious. And the impact is, as the Earth warms, it's more felt in the Arctic and subarctic than anywhere else, and it's opening the Arctic for development in a way that nobody ever thought was possible. The Northwest Passage is going to be open for shipping. Think of what we learned in class when we were in school. An icebreaker might get through there once every 5 years. It's going to be open for shipping now. The Beaufort Sea is going to be open for deep sea oil drilling. Incredibly risky activity. Mining, all sorts of things are going to happen. And there's a real challenge because a lot of communities in the north are poverty struck. And although the Aboriginal people understand the necessity to live in the land, live with the land in harmony with nature, it's their tradition for thousands of years. And although most of them still live off the land, there's a seductive call of jobs and money and big money when you're incredibly poverty struck and you're basically just surviving. So there's a very real risk politically that rapid development is going to be approved without the proper safeguards. And it's our view at the World Wildlife Fund Canada that some things we should just say no to, and others we need to put in place proper safeguards before anything happens. And if you have the rules in place beforehand, it's often a lot easier to deal with. Imagine, for example, if 20 years ago, when we first learned about collectively, nations started to take the first steps about climate change. In fact, the first conference was in Toronto, by the way. It was the year before Kyoto, and an agreement was signed. And if we've been able to do a bit more, it would be the Toronto Protocol that all the nations of the world were ignoring and Canada just walked away from, not the Kyoto Protocol. But if at that time, suppose we had put a price on carbon then, the development that's happening in Alberta will be thought of very, very differently if we'd had the rules in place then. And the same thing is possible in the Arctic because the opportunities are just happening. And the development isn't there yet. There's huge economic pressure for it, but it's not there yet. Some things are starting to happen, but the big development hasn't come. And we're particularly concerned at WWF Canada about the Beaufort Sea because of the incredibly abundant nature there and how fragile it is. Things like the beluga whale. Huge feeding grounds there off the Beaufort Shelf because the current comes up from below. Significant fish populations. On land, significant risk to the caribou. And what I'm going to talk about briefly is the Beaufort Sea. So Imperial Oil and Chevron both have applications today to drill deep sea wells in the Arctic. We know what can happen with deep sea wells off the coast of New Orleans. Imagine what might happen if something goes wrong in the Arctic. So we're deeply, deeply concerned about this. And we decided our strategy wouldn't just be to protest and say no, like some other organizations might. We decided to use the best available applied science to argue our case before the National Energy Board in an effort to stop these applications, or an absolute minimum have rules that were so strict that the risk was minimal. Now, I'm not persuaded you can have such rules because of the nature of the risk. What we did was we hired consultants who work for the oil industry and modeled what would happen if there was an oil spill in the Arctic. And we did it from deep sea drilling, shallow drilling, smaller spills in each, and we also did it from shipping if there was a problem with shipping. We announced this about 3 months ago, and then Dan Slavic, who did the work for us, did a tour of the Inuvialuit communities and showed them the information, because it was our philosophy, it's their information to help them make decisions, as well as our information to use at the National Energy Board. And just after we finished that tour, a fuel barge cut loose and drifted to the coast of Alaska. You may have followed this in the media. Now, fortunately, it didn't have too much fuel on, but it could have been disastrous. And for the reasons you'll see, what happens can be very problematic. So we did this modeling of what would happen with oil spills. It's on the internet, and I'm about to show you, I hope, what will happen when there is a spill, an example of it. This was based on actual data that happened in the past of currents and wind and weather and all of that. Real data using engineering models. And it's quite powerful and profound. And one of the things we did with it was we did a Google Hangout with the media. And we had media from all over Canada and different parts of Canada, in the north, in the west, in the east, in Ottawa, in Toronto, watching Dan Slavic, who was in Yellowknife, I think, at the time, do this on technology, and it was all free for us. And it was a fantastic way of communicating the results of the scientific work. Okay, let me see if I can call this up. Here we go. This is on our website, actually, if you're interested in seeing it. We're sorry. Oh, okay. So it's not going to work. Let me try it again. No, that is too bad. Okay, and I'll show you what it looks like. So what this would look like when it moves, if you can see this area here, what happens, all of this is coming from a well here. And this is the spill after a certain number of days, week 13. So what you see in real time on our website is the oil moving. And what this tells you, the light blue area is the Beaufort Shelf. And what this tells you is this is what happens with actual real currents when there's an oil spill, a deep sea oil spill, and it's really serious. And this is a medium spill. And one of the spills we did, they put dispersants on, just to see what would happen if you put dispersants, or at least they modeled dispersants. And dispersants are, in the oil industry, that's the current way of thinking of how you deal with an oil spill. And our work showed that made the problem worse. Because what dispersants do is push the oil below the surface. And this research showed that the currents go below the surface in this part of the Arctic Ocean. So what happened when you use dispersants is you not only do you not get rid of the problem, it actually created a far more significant problem for the whales and fish and others who were feeding off the Beaufort Shelf, and the oil would go all the way to Russia. So if there was a serious blowout in the Beaufort Sea, the oil would spread all the way to Russia and would create huge harm for nature and for the people who live off that nature, like the Inuvialuit. Very, very powerful evidence arguing that you shouldn't drill there in any way that risks a major blowout. And as I said, I haven't seen any evidence of any rules that are possible that can completely prevent that risk. Very powerful evidence, science-based, and if you saw this website work, it's really powerful because you can go to the medium spill, the maximum spill for a long time. You can go to a ship spill, and they all have pretty significant damage. Why? Because the weather there. You know, you can't. It's not like the Gulf of Mexico. You know, you can maybe count on the weather for 2 or 3 days if you're trying to clean up the oil spill, and then you're going to have a storm. So it creates huge, huge problems. This is going to be very powerful evidence. I indicated we're going to be using it at the National Energy Board hearing, and we did have huge, significant media and a real tour of the northern communities. The Imperial Oil and Chevron have both paused their applications. Now, I wouldn't for a minute suggest that it's because of our little video, but it is very important to know that they've paused those applications. And I wanted to give these examples because I think they show the importance of science, of being science-based, but also finding ways to talk about those issues in clear ways with powerful stories that inspire people to act. The challenges we face collectively as humanity are really significant. The challenges nature faces are even more significant in many ways because they've got less control. And these species, like the beluga whale pictured here, are a gift to us. They inspire us, they make our hearts sing, they often help us by being food. They're often just something that we should respect because we're part of the same world. They're tremendously threatened by climate change and by other human activity. And by being able to understand science and tell scientific stories correctly, I think we can inspire change. And that all really starts with science teachers, because you help people understand the basics and you help them learn how to communicate, and you're communicators yourself. So it's in that spirit I want to say thank you for having me here. I really appreciate your time and attention. I've got a few minutes for questions if there are any. Thank you very much. So this bear lives in the Great Bear Rainforest, by the way. I was there when that photo was taken. Like, how can you not want to say no to the Northern Gateway Pipeline when you see that picture? Yes? Yeah, we have some curriculums on our website. We just recently launched a Northern curriculum, which we built in partnership with science teachers from the Arctic area and with the Inuvialuit. And we have some other curriculums as well. If you give me your card, I'll get the people who work on that area to give you an email. We're a bit passive. Oh, great. Yes. So why don't you answer the question?
Yeah, so I actually left the WWF. I ran it program and if you want to participate in the show I came out, there's lessons there, ready to go. And also one of these other projects that David was talking about. So a lot of material that's pretty valuable.
And the reason I was fudging slightly because we haven't recruited a replacement yet because the shoes are too large to fill.
But it's truly a fantastic program. It's a really good
Yes.
The study that you showed, would it show that effect
Yes, one of the, it's very odd that it won't come up on my computer. It says it's too small, because I've seen it here numerous times. But there are, I think, 12 different scenarios. One is a major blowout with dispersants. So it shows actually what happens. It doesn't disaggregate and say, here's what happens without the dispersants, here's what happens with them, but it shows what actually happens with the dispersants. And the oil disperses, but in a way that is really bad for nature, and I would argue for people as well. And it just, if we go back to this, you would see the dots start around the X where the spill is, and then start going to your left, and you'd see it spread over time with the currents. So it shows it quite graphically, and there's the underlying scientific work in a report as well. Quite interesting. Imperial Oil immediately phoned us and said, can we have all your reports? And my wonderful scientist in the north sent an email saying, I'm going to give them to Imperial, and I emailed back and said, tell them we'll give them full access in the course of the judicial proceedings in the same way that they'll give us full access to their documents. Only because we need theirs, right? And if we asked them, they wouldn't give them to us. So anyway, there's you can visually see it, and then the report, the underlying science is all there about why the currents, where the currents are, and why it happens, and why it's suspended at that level and all this stuff. And I have to be honest, I haven't read that part of it. My job is to show this, which is the easier part, frankly. Anything else? Yes.
Just curious, like as training as an economist, sometimes from a science point of view, obviously you ask scientists, can you have infinite growth infinitely, or can growth continue infinitely, economic growth, or population growth, or whatever growth you're talking about. And it seems like just recently the Economic Forum in Asia, the world leaders agreed sort of that they're aiming for 2% GDP growth over time. What's your thought on sort of the disconnect between economics, which sort of looks at this idea of economic growth, expansion being sort of inevitable? If you don't have 2%, 5% GDP growth, then stagnation is an economic disaster, versus sort of from a ecological view, ecosystems generally tend towards stability. Right? You can't have growth for very long in any population or any variable in an ecosystem, otherwise it's unstable. So, what's your opinion on that?
Did everybody hear that question? Great. You obviously command your class with clear presentation skills.
Sure, it was tough of you to do this one.
No, it's great. I think that's that question is at the nub of the whole issue about how the behavior of humans is affecting me, or at least the big part of it. And as an economist, I studied international economics, which in the 70s was thought to be absurd. Who cared? What? No, we studied national economies. So I had the opportunity because of that to really specialize, and I loved it. I was very proud of it. In introductory economics, which in my university was called Economics 10, we had a professor and then 3 seminars a week. And in my seminar, I said to Jeffowitz, who was my seminar leader, he was a PhD student, I said, Jeff, I don't understand this. If I'm reading this correctly, in order for the economy to succeed, it has to grow infinitely. And surely that can't be possible. And he said, yeah, you're right. But we're just looking at the margins. It's a science about the margins, so don't worry about that. Well, I think today we have to worry about that. And I don't believe that our economic system in the big picture is sustainable, because we're starting to reach planetary limits on the exploitation of resources and the creation of waste. And the only answer is technology. And Steve Jobs said, I'm not going to do market research because people don't know what they need. So apparently we all need iPads. Now I'm as bad as anybody else. But we don't have that same kind of investment as much in things like how do we produce more food. Sure, there's some interesting, hydroponics and stuff, but with the size of the population and the desire of people in poor countries to have lifestyles like ours, I don't think the economic models and planetary limits on resources, I don't think the economic model is sustainable. And we fell into, post-World War II, we fell into the idea of growth when what we mean is prosperity. And they're actually different things. And there's been some interesting work done by a couple of people, including Peter Victor at York University, on this, in trying to figure out what would a society that values prosperity as an end result, as opposed to growth as a proxy for prosperity, what would that look like? Can we have a stable economy that keeps people working and creates meaningful lives, but respects the planetary limits on resources? And it's my view that 20 years from now, that's going to, in the same way that international economics in the 70s was thought of as an afterthought, and now that's all we do. I think that's going to become the mainstream of economics in about 20 years, because it has to be. We're not there yet. Economists don't think that way. You'll hear all governments talk about growth, and growth is going to get us out of it. Well, it might at the margins, but it's not sustainable in the bigger picture, I don't think. And that's a fantastic question. And if you get a better answer than I just gave you, please tell me, because I think it's right at the heart of everything. Anything else? Okay, well, thanks very much for joining me during lunch hour. I really appreciate it. And I got to give thanks to my WWF staffers. Even when they leave, they're still dedicated to our cause and doing great work. So thanks, everybody, and keep up your great work. It really matters. So thanks.
Thank you very much, David. There's so much to think about. I come to these conferences. Been around a while. But I mean, I always go away with lots more to think about, lots of things to share with my students and others. Thanks very much, David.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
That's it for our second live Google Hangout on air. And that'll probably be it for today, but look for more Hangouts on air starting tomorrow. We're going to have the Water Brothers and some other really cool presentations. And check out our Twitter for Teachers as well. Thanks.
There we go.